Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
So someone posted on here detailing the unusualness of their fiancé, which triggered me to write this post about my fiancé. I am getting close to the end of my rope. If possible, I'd like any advice at all. This all started happening a few weeks ago. My fiancé seemed radiantly happy, going about making wedding plans, when her mood suddenly took a 180. I was late getting home from work that day, and when I got home, the entire house was dark. It was 7 o'clock on a summer evening though, so the lack of lights wasn't too disturbing. But I know this girl, and she loves having tons of lights on everywhere. We regularly argue about her leaving the bedside light on when she sleeps. She's scared of the dark, which I find an adorably childish thing about her. Normally she comes running to greet me, with a bundle of endless chatter, asking me how my day was, a pretty bug she'd seen while she was out walking, what sort of things she'd done around the house. But it was completely silent and still when I got in. Thinking she might be upstairs, I went looking for her, only to find it empty. At this point, I was more curious than anything and sent her a text. I heard my text tone for her phone register inside the wall. At first my mind was blank, but then it occurred to me she was for some reason in the loft room which butted up against our bedroom. The loft room is in the unrefurbished part of the house, which is a farmhouse of 175 years. The floor is broken in. It's full of shit thrown in from years of remodeling. A kitchen island, a honest-to-goodness icebox, and there's a little set up steps, no more than a glorified ladder really, leading to a little loft. The loft is about a 10 by 10 foot space of ancient, warped boards, nails jutting out and sheet insulation. There's a tiny little room that was put up in probably the 1950s that's no more than a closet. It's maybe 5.5 to 6 feet long, only big enough to put in a bed. There's hooks in it to hang clothes, no windows or electricity. My fiancé understandably thinks this room is incredibly creepy. She rarely goes in except to throw in bric-a-brac and store her garden supplies. So I went back through the house to get to the loft and called up to her. No response, so I went up the rickety little set of stairs and peeked into the loft. There she was, sitting on the floor of the little loft room, knees drawn to her chest, arms raised up to her face, and blood everywhere. Cue feelings of dread and panic as I rushed over to her. She was sitting in a bed of glass which was slowly turning from white to red. She had rivers of blood running down her forearms, shins, knees, and face. I managed to extricate her from the pile without doing any more damage to her. The whole time I kept asking what was wrong and how had this happened, but got absolutely no response. Her eyes were so wide I could practically see the whites around her irises. Her face was deathly pale, but I couldn't tell if it was shock or lack of blood. She was dead cold. Not wanting to tempt fate, I took her to the hospital. Luckily, only a few of the cuts needed stitches and none on her face, but she ended up swaddled in bandages. While she really didn't need blood, the doctors gave her an IV with fluids, and she eventually came around from her state of deep shock. I stayed with her through the whole thing, knowing she would probably be scared if she was alone. Until that moment, she didn't really seem to register her surroundings. So when she looked at me and reached out to hold my hand, I knew she was somewhat back. I asked her what had happened, and she only shook her head. She's honestly not very good at explaining long and detailed events, but I grilled her. Eventually, I managed to extract some details. She had been making dinner when she had heard something upsetting in the loft room. She went to investigate and found a stack of boards had fallen almost onto the stairs, and she went to push it back up. Once she was up in the loft, she became curious about the little loft room, which she had never really wanted to investigate, and went in. She had only been in there for a few minutes picking through the stuff in it before something blocked out the light behind her. She couldn't really explain it. She started making excuses, saying she didn't want to talk about it because she was scared. After nearly 10 minutes of persuading her, she said she thought it was a man, but he had moved into the room so fast. He had a pane of glass that hadn't been used in the restoration, and when she'd stepped back to defend herself, and subsequently fallen, he smashed the thing over her. But here's the thing, she said it didn't really hit her, It was like the glass had detonated with the force of a bomb before it had, and the man had darted out of the room and around the corner, where she heard footsteps circling her room rapidly. This went on for some time before she heard me enter the house. Then the footsteps descended the loft room, and the door from the loft room to the outside opened and shut. But she was so scared it was like she couldn't move. She got my text, and still she couldn't move. Eventually I got the gist and found her in the loft. She had wanted to scream at me to run, to be careful, that the man was still around, but she couldn't move or speak. I dug her out of the glass, took her out to the car, and she said she couldn't see any evidence of the man at all. I wanted to file a police report, but she was adamantly against it. I eventually let it drop, intending to tell my large and well-armed family about the incident. It didn't occur to her at the time to tell me not to tell anyone else. We went home with the warning of infections and changing bandages, etc. She seemed terrified to fall asleep and cried intermittently on the way home. When we were pulling into the driveway, she admitted to me she couldn't explain anything about the man. Maybe the pane of glass had fallen on her and her mind had made up the rest. I agreed it was a possibility, and she actually seemed comforted. She fell asleep on the couch. I sat up for some time, unable to sleep. Her good humor resumed, but slightly cautiously. She went back to wedding planning, and I told my family to be on the lookout for the man. And then, nearly a week after the first incident, I came home early for lunch one afternoon. The kitchen was empty, but the doors leading to the loft room were open. I walked over to investigate and found my fiancé looking into the open door of the loft room with a long, wicked-looking knife in her hand. She's small, but can exhibit extreme fits of strength while in a fit of fear or anger. I've seen her go through a branch on a maple tree with a machete, so I kept my distance and asked her in a clear and loud voice what she was doing. She nearly jumped out of her skin, reached out and slammed the door shut. She said she thought she'd heard something in the loft room. I fetched a gun, loaded it with some slugs, and ascended the stairs. Empty and still, the pile of bloody glass was still there. There was a sharp snap at the bottom of the stairs, and I immediately turned. The screen door to the outside of the house had just clicked shut. The wooden storm door was open, with a great gaping gash in it. I went back down the stairs to find my fiancée, only to see her outside, by the tall grass in the yard that separated us from the hayfield next to our house. She had her knife raised, and as I watched, leapt into the grass. I felt like I couldn't move fast enough. I was about to hit the door when my fiancé's tiny little voice chirped up behind me. "Did you find anything?" Sad, bedraggled and bandaged, she stood there anxiously clasping her hands together. I told her I didn't. I was not going to go outside. I was going to keep my shotgun handy, and if I got any visitors that night, I was going to shoot them. As it was, I did get a number of strange phone calls that night. I was called into work only to find that the person who had supposedly called me was confused. They hadn't called and nothing was wrong. I had brought my fiancée along with me. She was eager to not be alone in the house. The second we pulled into the driveway of the house, I got another phone call, the same person calling me for the same reason, and flipping out to the point where he was screaming. But there was no background noise. In my line of work, it's messy, it's dirty, and it's always, always loud. This guy sounded like he was standing in a quiet room. I just hung up the phone and told my fiancée it was nothing. I turned off my phone and we went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to my fiancée shifting. I thought she was getting out of bed, but when I sat up, I saw her standing at the far window, just staring, kind of shifting back and forth from foot to foot. I went over to her and asked her what was wrong. She said she was watching the man in the lawn. If she took her eyes off of him, he would move and come into the house. She was protecting me. I looked out and could see nothing. The halogen light installed when I first moved in cast light all the way to the road. All I could see were shadows. I realized she was probably sleepwalking, and she wouldn't notice the difference of being in front of the window or being in bed, so I led her back, laid her down, and plastered myself next to her. She fell immediately to sleep and didn't move again the whole night. It was a little disturbing, and when I woke up, I felt a blind little moment of panic. I shook her, and when she didn't respond, called her name and shook her harder. Eventually she stirred, making upset little chirping noises, so I let her fall back asleep with a kiss. Then I noticed the scratches on her back. They weren't nearly as bad as the cuts she'd sustained before, but I could see where a couple of them had reopened. Little trickles of blood were running onto the bed, in fact, so I woke her up anyway. She would freak out if she woke up in a pool of her own blood. I persuaded her to come downstairs, informing her she'd scratched her back, and she matter-of-factly told me it hadn't been her. It had been the man with the crazy eyes. What the hell? She'd mumbled this, and she sounded half asleep, so I put this aside and led her downstairs. Now the stairs, for whatever reason, have another normal bedroom door attached to them at the bottom, so you have to open it before you get all the way down. Occasionally, it will be left open, or even partially open, by my fiancé or I. This morning, it was open a crack, and I could see someone in the crack looking up at us as we descended. I let go of my fiancé and ran down the rest of the stairs, intending to hit the door and smash the face of the person they wouldn't have been able to get away in time. Indeed, I felt a satisfactory thump as the door hit something solid, and then it just kind of melted, like the resistance was bleeding out of it. The face that was turned up watching us turned into a figure darting past the door. An instant later, I heard a clatter in the loft room and the screen door slamming. My fiancé suddenly tears past me and out the front screen door. I had not at all been prepared for this and missed my opportunity to grab her as she passed. By the time I hit the front door, she's racing at a clump of weeds and long grass rustling, but she's only halfway across the lawn. I shout at her, and she stops dead. I put on a burst of speed and catch up to her. Fight ensues. We go back inside. I'm furious she ran after the thing. She had been furious and was contrite. She really didn't know what had come over to her. At this point, I'm starting to get wary of leaving her alone in the house and taking her to work with me. We don't talk about what we saw or what happened. This turns out to be a good thing. We get back at a reasonable time and have dinner. The only downfall is the overwhelming scent of gas. At first, I was afraid the stove had been left on, or there was a gas leak. Nothing of the sort. We eventually figured it to be the smell of methane and something had probably died somewhere. We spent the rest of the daylight hours trying to figure out where it was, because the smell seemed to travel. We eventually pinned it to the outside corner of the kitchen, and we both went outside to investigate. We didn't find any dead animals. We did find 2 clear footprints of a person in bare feet, standing in the soft soil of the garden, right in front of the window. We went back inside. Without really discussing it, we made sure everything was locked and secure. I latched the door to the loft room for the first time. It's an eye latch, so there's no way to open it from the loft room. We went to bed shortly thereafter. Fiancé closed the door and surreptitiously moved the trash in front of it. That night, my fiancé woke up talking in her sleep no less than 5 times. As you can imagine, neither of us slept great. I went into work feeling like shit, alone this time because my fiancé insisted on staying at home. There was quite a stir at work when I got there. Apparently, my uncle had shot a very strange animal. While we aren't really deck crazy, apparently they thought bringing this mystery animal to them was probably for the best. It was in the back of his truck, and curious, I went over to see. It looked like some sort of badly constructed dog. Its forelegs and chest were remarkably bigger than its hindquarters. Its feet were canid, but hairless, and the toes had a prehensile look to them. Its face was the worst, though. But first, let me finish what happened 2 weeks ago. I was talking about this dog. It was ugly as sin. Its face was nearly simian. It was nearly flat with dog-like lips and a dog-like forehead. But its nostrils were huge and curled. It had died eating something. There were scraps of what looked to be fur in its mouth and blood in its teeth. My uncle said he had shot it while it had been trying to climb a tree near their camp. And no, I didn't take a picture of the thing. Besides, I was busy, and I really only stopped to glance at it before moving on to do my work. I go through my morning work like normal, which is refreshing. I don't feel worried, and my fiancé hasn't called me about anything. I feel like I'm ahead of the game when I think I spot someone crouching beside one of the buildings. Even from where I am, I can see his huge eyes just staring at me, his mouth in a huge O. When I catch sight of him, he ducks behind the building he's beside, and I can see him running, hunched over through the mesh that makes up the walls of the building. He's very fast, almost like an animal. I keep my cool. I spread the word to the rest of the workers, and they vow to keep an eye out for him. By this time, it's time for lunch, and I'm relieved. My brain has already been fucked with enough for one day, and I head to my truck. Once I get there, I'm about to climb into my truck when I open the door and the stench of rotting flesh and wet fur rolls out. And there's nothing in my truck. It smells bad enough to be the ape dog my uncle shot, but it's just the smell. I figure it may just be the place I parked my truck, so I get it and drive off. The smell eventually dissipates, but still lingers when I slow down or stop the truck. When I pulled into the driveway is when I realized what was wrong. From where I'm sitting, and due to the attachment on my truck, I can't see into the bed of the truck. I hadn't bothered looking into the box when I got in. So casually, as to not tip off to my fiancé inside that something was wrong, I climb out of my pickup and check into the back. Indeed, the disgusting thing had been jammed into my bed, curled up and twisted around to fit. Before my fiancé could come out to greet me, I got back into my truck and drove back to work, opened the tailgate of my truck when I got there, and just let the thing fall onto the lawn. I was feeling exceptionally pissed at whoever had done this and hadn't wanted to discuss it with anyone. When I actually walked into my house, I could smell lunch cooking, but I also could tell something was wrong. My fiancé's face was blotchy and a little wet, which meant she had been crying. She admitted that lately she had been harboring a little cat outside and had been feeding it scraps and leftover cat food the people who had lived in our house last had left. She said last night she had heard a cat, presumably her friend, screaming as if it were in a fight, and he hadn't come around like he usually did in the morning. It made me think of the ape dog thing and what I'd seen in its teeth. It had definitely been white and black fur, and I couldn't think of anything in the wild with that combination. I didn't tell her. I sympathized with her, assuring her that cats just make rounds, and he would probably be back soon. I don't feel bad for lying. The truth wouldn't have helped in the slightest. So after the dog thing, life goes almost back to normal, until this past weekend. This Friday we were finishing up a big project at work when I got a message from an unknown number. It's a picture and it's blurry. I delete the thing and block the number. The message comes in about 6 more times, each with a slightly different picture. I recognize it eventually as my backyard, as seen from a high vantage point. Obviously, this is highly unsettling, and so I call my fiancé and ask her what she's up to. She says she's up a ladder, painting the back porch stoop, terrified, because she hates heights. I ask her if she's been sending me any pictures. No, she says, it's all she can do to not fall off the ladder. If I want a picture of her work, she'd be happy to send one, however. I give her the go-ahead, and she sends me a picture while we're talking. Her work is good, but what I also see in the picture makes my blood curdle. I immediately catch sight of a face in the window above the stoop, clear as day, with the same huge, unnerving eyes as the man I'd seen a week before. I'm about to tell my fiancé to get down from the ladder and get away from the house when I hear her shriek. I hear the phone hit something and then hit the ground. Something much heavier than the phone immediately follows, and the sound of the ladder unsetting, and then nothing but silence and muffled birdsong. I call out to my fiancé multiple times and get nothing but silence. She's fallen and she's broken her neck is my only thought as I abandon the project, get into my truck and do 80 as I drive back to the house. From on top of the hill, I can see the crumpled mess of my fiancé and the ladder on the ground. I don't even bother using the driveway. I drive across the lawn to get directly to her. My dread is lessened somewhat when I see her moving beneath the ladder. She reaches up and pushes the thing off of her and sits up, clutching her head. Blood is everywhere. I get out and assess the wound. She has a deep gash in her scalp. Even as she looks up at me and asks where the asshole man went, she passes out. I run into the house and grab towels and press one to her head and call an ambulance. We get to the hospital where she requires yet more stitches. She's unconscious for nearly 13 hours. When she did wake up, I had already gone home to get cleaned up and a change of clothes. When I walked in, I was delighted to see she was awake. She was crying a little, but mostly because she was really happy to see me. She had woken up in the room alone. This time, she very freely told me what she had seen and what had happened. She said there had been a man crouching kind of like a lizard on the top of the stoop. She had said for the longest time, she had heard this nauseating crunching sound like something chewing coming from above her. When she had finally looked up after she had taken her picture, she had seen the man. She had jolted, startled, and let out an involuntary shriek, lost her balance, and fell. When she woke up, the man was gone. I was there, and then she'd passed out again.
I saw something tall and slender. The first time I saw whatever it was behind a tree looking at my car. It was tall, probably around 8 feet, and it was incredibly fast. It caught my eye because I was just shining a flashlight around like an idiot. I had a good 10 seconds or so because I shit myself, because I didn't believe in these kinds of things, and dropped my flashlight. Whatever it was took off running in a circle around my car, and it only took about 3 seconds for it to my 2 o'clock to my 7 o'clock. It never came closer than 50 yards, but it didn't run away either. I ended up starting my car and just tearing ass out of that place. I should have left it at that, but I didn't. I probably went back over the summer of 2006 around 20 times. Sometimes things would happen that I can't explain, and sometimes nothing happens. This location was pretty deep in the woods on some back road. The only reason I even went there to begin with is because a friend and I were bored on a Friday night and he heard that there was some creepy abandoned church on that dirt road. Over the summer of '06, I had something throw rocks and smaller pieces of wood at my car, something that sounded like a child crying from deep in the woods, intense feelings which I or other people I took there had no reason to feel. Happiness, calmness, nausea, anger. I still don't know what that place was. I haven't been back in a long time on the principle I shouldn't fuck with shit like that. If it is really nothing, that would be great, because I took on a whole lot of ridicule for telling people what happened to me.
Could have been a fox. I'm not discrediting or saying I don't believe, I do. I'm just giving a possibility. Interesting experience though, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought of too, and a good point. What I heard wasn't a whine though. There were pitch changes which sounded different. I could have been an old-ass fox, though. Another thing to add is that the area was pretty deep in the woods, and it was midsummer in Michigan, so you would think that the woods would be pretty noisy. Bugs, squirrels, deer, bear, or spring peepers at least, but it was silent. I forgot to add that my mom's side of the family lives in Michigan. Before she moved here as a little girl, she lived out in the boondocks, like way in the woods by Grand Rapids and Maple Rapids. My grandpa said he's seen some crazy shit in the forest at night, both the likes of Bigfoot and a wolf man. He used to tell us campfire stories on the Maple River when we'd camp there. If you want, I can share his story. It's somewhat long. Keep in mind that this place is hardcore Michigan boondocks. My grandpa must have been maybe in his 30s when this happened, and my mom maybe 4 or 5. So this was 40 years ago. It all started really with reports of dogmen and Bigfoot in the newspaper. People said they would see things out in fields and while hunting in the woods. My grandpa's closest neighbors, who were 4 miles away, had a massive orchard cleared of all fruit in one night, leading them to believe there were more than just one, but that there were multiple together, almost in packs. His first experience was with my grandmother. They were coming home late one night, maybe around 11 or 12 from the store. Since they lived way out, it was a long drive home along a lot of dirt roads. They were maybe 3/4 the way home when they thought they saw a man on the side of the road up ahead. This wasn't uncommon where they were, so they stopped a little ways back so he could cross. What they saw they didn't clearly see, but what it did do, they saw clear as day. As you know, an old dirt road is a little less than your standard paved back road, so still kind of wide. The man was clearly taller than average and had very long legs. In one step it walked into the center of the road, and in a second step was at the other side, completely clearing the road and disappearing into the woods. They both sat there, looking for back and forth to the road and each other. My grandpa finally asked my grandma if she saw what he just saw, and she said, "I think I did." Then they both drove home without saying another word, but that's just the first encounter. About 2 weeks later, he had pushed the incident to the back of his mind, but as it was hunting season, he was still on edge every time he went. My mother had been begging him to take her with him, as he was always taking her 2 older sisters. he finally gave in and took her with him. Now my grandpa walked to his hunting spot because it was deep in the woods and a 3-hour walk from his house. He got to the tree stand at about 6 at night during summer, so the sun was about to start going down. At about 11, when he would normally head back, he had no luck. But as this hunting season was already proving fruitful, he decided to stay a little longer. At about 2 in the morning, my grandpa decided it was time to go home because my mom was about to fall asleep. They started to make their way down the trail. After maybe what was 45 minutes of walking, he noticed something was off. He couldn't tell what, but gut feeling told him something wasn't right. He looked around him and saw nothing. His gut was still telling him otherwise, so he picked up his pace a bit. Maybe 10 minutes later, he found out what was making him feel this way. My mom, barely able to keep her eyes open, noticed nothing. But my grandfather could hear faintly behind him in the distance, footsteps. He stopped and looked around again, and couldn't see anything. He started to walk a little bit faster, almost at a speed walk, trying to ignore the footsteps. He noticed that the footsteps' pace had sped up too, so he turned around again. Now my grandpa is a brave man, and has seen a lot of messed up and scary shit. But what he saw completely unsettled him, this being one of the most disturbing things he's ever seen. He could see 4 sets of literal glowing red eyes about 8 feet off the ground. They were peeking out from behind some trees about 30 feet back. He turned again, grabbed my mother's hand, and started jogging. My mother kept asking him why he was going so fast, but all he could focus on was the footsteps until he heard the other noise, breathing. He could hear heavy breathing behind him along with the footsteps. This was what truly scared the shit out of him. As he was jogging, he turned around and could see the eyes much closer than before. That's when he knew that he had to get out of there as fast as possible. He grabbed my mother in one arm and put his rifle in the other and took off at a full sprint down the trail. He did not slow for what seemed like forever. This was freaking out my mom, and she was whimpering in his arm. But over that, as he was sprinting, he could still hear the footsteps and the breathing, getting slowly closer and closer. He was sure they were maybe 5 feet behind him when he saw the tree line about 20 feet off. He didn't dare look back and took off even faster than he thought he could. He reached the tree line and turned up the road. Just over this hill was his house. Just up this hill, he was home free. Suddenly, he heard something yell. He ignored it and it yelled again, realizing that someone or something was yelling the word Dad. This made him stop dead in his tracks about halfway up the hill. He looked to the top and saw 2 figures. As he was already freaking out about something yelling Dad to him, he was panicking even more because they were in front and behind him. One of the figures at the top of the hill cupped its hands by its mouth and yelled Dad again. That's when he realized it was his 2 eldest daughters at the top of the hill yelling for him. Now his protective instincts kicked in as all of his children were outside. He turned around and looked back, and could see the eyes motionless just inside the tree line far behind him. He started to sprint up the hill, yelling at his daughters to run home and not to stop. Once inside, he found out that my grandmother sent them out looking for him because he wasn't home at the usual time. He wouldn't talk about this for days after what happened, and it was years before he went hunting again. Since then, he's had nothing happen to him, but he has let me know that he still does not go out hunting today without looking over his shoulder.
Alright guys, I have a story for you, something that happened to me a really long time ago. When I was very little, from the time I was born until I was around 4, my parents and I lived in a small house that had a lot of crazy paranormal activity going on. There were always weird noises. My mom said that the cupboards and walls used to leak a strange, dark red, syrupy fluid, and I remember laying in bed at night and watching faces float up out of the floor and up through the ceiling. Anyway, one night when I was 2, 1987, I kept waking up crying and screaming, and my parents came in and asked me what was wrong. I told them I saw a monster outside of my bedroom window, and when they asked me what it looked like, I grabbed my Jackalman action figure from Thundercats and showed them. They didn't think too much of it at that point, and once I calmed down, I fell back asleep. Later that night, our dog started acting strange. His name was Sinbad, and he was a shepherd mix, huge, and had never been afraid of anything. but that night he kept whimpering and hiding with his tail between his legs. It made my parents, and my uncle who was visiting, feel pretty uncomfortable, especially after what I said I'd seen. Sometime after midnight, my mom was using the bathroom when she heard deep, heavy breathing outside the window. Except the window in the bathroom was very small and about 7 feet above the ground. She yelled to my dad and uncle, and they ran outside and around the house to where the bathroom window was. To this day, they both swear that this is true, and neither of them are really believers in the paranormal. They claim they both saw a massive man, between 7 and 8 feet tall, but since it was dark they couldn't see any real details. When it saw them, it took off running and they chased it, but when it hit the empty lot behind our house, they say it dropped to all fours and tore off so fast they could never hope to catch up to it.
I've had an experience with a dogman once, and I'm glad it was only once. They really do look as horrible as they sound. Just looking at this 7-8 foot tall mass of muscle, fur, and ugly would make anyone freeze in terror. Long-ass arms and legs to match. Claws that are much larger than should be necessary, and teeth that could probably gore a human without breaking a sweat. And the eyes. Worst fucking part. These things appear to be extremely dominant. I'm very sure they know exactly how much power they have. As soon as one sees you and notices you're alone, they'll just stand there and stare. He stands as tall as he can, locks eyes with you, and glares straight into your soul. I was just lucky I was in my home on the 2nd floor. I was just unlucky enough to notice an immense feeling of dread in the midst of trying to fall asleep. My eyes were immediately drawn to the window and off into these woods right on the edge of our backyard. The first thing I notice is that it's extremely dark. At first I'm wondering why the hell did I feel like someone was eyeballing me like I'm a piece of meat. I can't see shit. How could someone see me? But then I see them, bright-ass yellow eyes, right on the edge of the tree line, just staring. I'm a little groggy at the moment, so it takes me a moment to think about it. We've had issues with wild dogs leaving bloody animal bones all over our backyard, rabbits and shit like that, just scattered everywhere. So I calmed down a little. Well, shit, it's just a dog. It's staring at me very creepily, but it's nothing to be scared of. I was fine then until I realized the eyes were, you guessed it, hovering at least 7 feet off the ground. There wasn't a hill or anything like that, and there's no way some dog climbed up a freaking tree. So ensues the real panic attack. What in the actual fuck is that? Just what? My brain stopped cooperating and I just stood there and stared back. Time slowed down. So yeah, I just stood there. I don't even know how long, but it felt like hours. Regardless, eventually this thing got sick of our little staring contest and scowled at me, baring his teeth through the shade, which were only visible, I'm guessing, thanks to the clear sky and full moon that night. Absolutely horrified, I freeze up even more. Time starts back up and I start realizing the actual depth of the situation. Jesus Christ, it's a werewolf like from those stupid movies and old legends. How is this even happening? This can't be real. I'm starting to tear up from the mental and emotional stress of seeing a mythical creature. Looking at this and realizing it actually exists, it absolutely breaks your mind. All of my conceptions on what's real are not shattered. Werewolves, what's next, Bigfoot, the Jersey Devil, the Mothman, and then my mind screeches to a halt. Oh God, he's moving. Realizing I've become distracted, he started to lurk out of the woods, slowly, calmly. Every movement calculated to keep me on edge, but also keep me from snapping and retreating back to my bed. He makes his way halfway across the yard and really comes into view. I am simultaneously staring in awe and shitting my pants in horror at the sight of this massive creature. So big but so silent, a natural hunter. I decided to call it quits and run back to my bed. He's getting very close to the house and he just keeps staring dead at me, with this evil grin across his face. I'm done, I'm dreaming, this isn't happening. Being the coward that I am, I jump back into my bed, throw the covers over my head, and try to pretend I never saw that. And then it hits me again, the gut-wrenching terror. The room has become ice cold in the middle of summer, and I swear to God I can feel someone breathing down my neck. What? I thought I was done with this. I swear I'm gonna look up and there's gonna be nothing there. I'm just losing my mind. Yeah, just losing my mind, that's all. What I just saw was a hallucination induced by my sleep-addled brain. So I work up the nerve and throw the blanket off and look straight at the window. Keep in mind, by the way, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but to a 11-year-old little wuss, it seemed pretty brave. Regardless, I was literally shaking in my boots, shivering like a dog left out in the cold, and I had plenty reason to be. As soon as I looked at the window, it was immediately clear. This is real. This isn't some stupid dream. This feral beast is pressing his face against the glass, breathing slowly, fogging the glass, all while he has this sick grin plastered across his face. Sadistic bastard. So he continues to just stare at me, clinging to the second-story window. Somehow he didn't make a single noise climbing up there. Hell, he might have just leaped up there. Hell if I know. I was completely frozen in terror. And I'm not gonna lie, I pissed my bed, nearly voided my bowels. I was pretty sure I was gonna die, so I just lay there, staring into his eyes so filled with hunger and wrath. Eventually, I passed out from exhaustion and woke up the next day soaking in what's probably a mix of urine and sweat. So I changed my clothes, wash away, and go to eat some breakfast. I've forgotten to mention, by the way, I have a brother, and he slept in the same room on the top part of a bunk bed. I mentioned what I saw to him, and he seized up, looked like he was having some kind of horrible flashback. He proceeds to tell me to shut the fuck up and runs outside too. Screw around with his friends, leaving my young self pretty confused. Later that day when he came home, I asked him what that was all about. He's still pretty shaken up, but he actually starts talking about why he reacted that way. Turns out this man-wolf thing would stalk him every day on his way to school, and it would stand outside and stare at him all night. God, this is getting a lot longer than I planned on it being. Talking about this shit takes me back. Anyways, he continues to explain that he also saw him the night before. He just did what he would usually do. Try not to look at him, try not to hear him, try to pretend he's not there. He did notice I got up and started actually paying attention to him, and he said I was pretty stupid for that, as we both soon realized that only motivated him to terrorize us even more. Nothing else really happened involving the dogman, at least not for me. Regardless, it still haunts us both to this day. Writing this and visualizing what I've seen almost brings tears to my eyes again. And even if I so much as mention this to my brother, he freezes up just like he did as a child and nervously exclaims that we don't talk about that. Anyways, hope you fellow/x/files enjoyed my story. I wouldn't blame you for claiming this is bullshit. Most of the stories on here are. I just hope it has brought you some entertainment and maybe a bit of insight on what it's like to actually meet one of these strange creatures.
Can you describe the eyes more? What makes them so terrifying, if you can put it into words?
It's a little difficult to describe, but I think I can give a good idea why they had such an impact on me. When I looked out into the woods, they were the first thing I noticed. And you would think it would be a faint glow or flicker like some other animal's eyes, but no. These were seriously bright, illuminated, like a candle in the pitch black. They were obviously there. No illusory bullshit. You could absolutely tell they were there. And the longer I stared, the more I noticed about him. These eyes were full of intelligence, emotion. It was observing me, thinking out what its next move should be. And once it got closer, it started getting angry at me. Probably because I wouldn't stop staring at him. Hell, he might have just been trying to hunt, and I was distracting him, so he decided to mess with me and intimidate me for a bit of fun. And yeah, at some point, I could clearly tell he was enjoying torturing me. As he pressed his face against the glass, his eyes grew narrow. His grin widened even more, and his breathing grew deep and heavy. He was getting some sort of sadistic pleasure from doing this, and I could tell, I'm sure he even wanted me to know. Regardless, yes, the eyes had a special effect on me. They glowed in the damn dark, stared straight into my soul. But the very worst part was the confirmation that he was enjoying this. Staring into his eyes, I could tell. He was not hunting for meat, but for pleasure. Just like a human.
And yes, thank you for the story. It's matched up perfectly with everyone else who says they've seen them. The terror, the eyes that look not at you, but through you. And the malice. Do you remember what it looked like besides that? Were the legs bent like a dog's? Were the ears on top of its head? Or on the side? Did it have a tail?
God, yes, the malice fits what I was reading from him perfectly. These dogmen are fucking sadistic, just way too human. But yeah, physical appearance, good subject because their makeup almost looks more like a sick mutation than successful evolution, but regardless, they thrive. Like I said, huge claws, almost even longer than the fingers themselves. It had long, spindly arms that somehow still showed quite a bit of muscle. Extremely wide shoulders, this thing swaggered with the confidence of 1,000 meatheads. And its legs, pretty strange how they carry themselves like that. Way too long and very lanky. They looked warped, like dog legs that were bent back too far, but somehow forced straight again after being broken. I couldn't see them too well because I was too busy staring at its face, but that's the best description I think I can give. Oh, and the ears. The sides of the head pointing straight up, I believe. It's been a long time, so my memory's a little hazy, but that should be right. And the tail, I can't promise that this is accurate, didn't get a very good look at his back. A hunter never turns its back on its prey. Regardless, I think it may have looked somewhat like the tail of Border Collie, except very mangy.
My father and I actually encountered something here in our pasture, 22 acres of open swampy fields surrounded by dense woods on two sides, that was pretty spoopy. My dad took our dog out back to take a leak, and she started freaking the fuck out, so he started shining his light, 1500 lumen flashlight, around the pasture. He comes back in and tells me to put on some shoes and grab a light. I also grabbed my shotgun from the cabinet, still not knowing why I was doing so. We walk outside and he tells me that he didn't want to scare my stepmother with what he had seen. He tells me that he saw a pair of huge yellow eyes about 7 feet off the ground, and that they looked at him, blinked, and then turned and disappeared. My first thought is, why are we out here in the middle of the night chasing after a fucking monster in the pitch black? There was no moonlight. Here in Florida, it's cloudy a lot to see by. We checked the area where he said he saw the eyes, roughly, and took note that there were no tracks whatsoever. So we spread to about 30 feet apart and did a sweeping pattern search for any signs of life and saw nothing. He checked out the interior of our barn while I climbed up onto the berm surrounding our pond. I'm looking around from the higher vantage point and shine the light into the woods behind our property. I didn't see what was there, but I heard the big bastard running the woods away from, breaking branches and making trees sway as it took off. I swear it sounded like a fucking rhino charging through the woods. I set up my night vision camera and our trail cam in the general area that he saw the eyes, and put out some old pork ribs as bait. The next morning I went out to recover the cameras and found that neither had recorded a single thing. It was as if I'd never turned them on at all. The bait I'd put out was gone as well. Both had plenty of battery power. The trail cam takes 4 D cells and the night vision camera had a fully charged battery. The SD card from the NVC wouldn't even work for a month after that. Since then, very odd sounds come out of the woods behind us now, but not like anything I've ever heard, and I've lived in the woods for all my life, so I know what things are supposed to sound like. I don't know if this was a dog man, but it fits the general description based on what we encountered.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.